The colour bar was instilled by the Bristol Omnibus Company, giving them the right to refuse employment of black or Asian bus crews in Bristol. This eventually led to the Bristol Bus Boycott of 1963, led by Paul Stephenson and the West Indian Development Council, made up of Roy Hackett, Owen Henry, Audley Evans and Prince Brown. In order to test the existence of the colour bar, Stephenson arranged an interview with the bus company for Guy Bailey, a West Indian man. When the bus company was told that Bailey was West Indian, the interview was cancelled. This was the main cause of the Bristol Bus Boycott. It was also, however, inspired by the civil rights movement taking place in the USA at the time. Parallels can be drawn between Rosa Parks' refusal to give up her seat for a white man in Alabama and the start of the movement in Bristol. Both resulted in bus boycotts, which ultimately changed the law. For example, as a result of the action taken in Bristol, a Race Relations Act was passed in 1965 in the UK, which made racial discrimination unlawful in public places. This was further extended in 1968 to housing and employment. Therefore, the removal of the colour bar had a large impact on race relations in Bristol.
The research question that we have posited is how did the removal of the colour bar by the Bristol Omnibus Company impact race relations within the workforce? We decided on the topic of the Bristol Bus Boycott because we found it an enjoyable section of our module, as well as an event that we did not know about before. In addition, we chose this topic in light of the recent events regarding the Black Lives Matter protest in Bristol and the subsequent toppling of the Colston statue. We also decided on this question because we found that information on the Bristol Bus Boycott tended to focus on either the lead-up or the protests themselves, rather than on the aftermath. Our question went through several refinements before we reached a final one. For example, we initially wanted to research the effects that the removal of the colour bar had on ticketing prices, but we discovered that archival accounts of the Bristol Omnibus Company were difficult to find or had been destroyed. So therefore we decided to change our question to focus on the impacts of the removal of the colour bar on race relations in Bristol. But we found this to be too broad, so again we further narrowed it down to race relations within the workplace. In this presentation, we will be discussing the methods that we would undertake to answer our research question, including interview transcripts and newspaper articles. In addition, we will also present the types of data that could be produced from this. And so we will now move on to discuss the methods that we would use to answer our research question, beginning with interview transcripts.
One way of answering our research question is through building on the work of Professor Madge Dresser and her influential book Black and White on the Buses, which was originally published in 1986 after she discovered the lack of research into the bus boycott and its impacts. As part of writing the pamphlet, she interviewed black and white members of the Bristol Omnibus Company who were employed at the company in the months and years following the removal of the colour bar. The interviews investigated the impact of the boycott and discrimination once black workers were employed by the bus company. These interviews conducted by Madge Dresser would be useful in assisting us to answering our own research question. The transcripts from the interviews reveal the opinions of the workforce after the removal of the colour bar. This slide shows quotes from the interviews that Dresser conducted. The table we created demonstrates a clear division between the degree of continued discrimination and racism within the workforce. For example, one conductress commented, "We never worried if they were black, white, coloured or what. We never took any notice. I think they are more or less accepted after the first couple of weeks," suggesting that race relations improved after the removal of the colour bar. This contrasts the comment by a Lawrence Hill bus driver, who said, "There was an odd incident between someone who was violently anti-coloured, which suggests there was more discrimination." In addition to using these interviews by Madge Dresser from the book Black and White on the Buses, we believe an interview of Madge Dresser herself would be beneficial to answering our research question. Although she was not present at the boycott itself, she has spent many years researching the boycott, and in addition to writing her own book, she has been interviewed many times herself on the subject and wrote the webpage about the Bristol Bus Boycott on the Bristol Museum's website, suggesting she has a wealth of knowledge on this topic. Although the interviews conducted by Dresser would be useful, we feel like interviewing employees from the company at the time ourselves would also help to answer our question. Dresser's interviews do not explain how long discrimination continued for, or whether the removal of the colour bar was increasingly accepted over time, so new research and interviews would provide a more detailed account of the impact of the boycott. They might be able to explain more about whether black bus drivers were against integration as well, as suggested in some of the quotes from Dresser's book. Conducting new interviews would help to develop further detail to the questions. We would also need to be cautious when considering new interview questions, as it has been almost 60 years since the boycott, so accounts could have changed. For example, they might be more reluctant to admit to any discrimination, as it is no longer seen as socially acceptable as it was at the time of the boycott.
This slide will cover why newspaper articles should be used as sources and will also address some issues present with the archives surrounding the bus boycott. There are multiple newspaper articles that date back to 1963 that can be used as great sources to answer the question on the removal of the colour bar by the bus company and how this impacted race relations within the workforce. Newspaper articles from the time show the opinions of people within the company's workforce from both perspectives of the colour bar restrictions. Two quotes from the articles that show the race relations and can be used to answer the question are that whites believe that coloured workers lower the tone of the job, and among white workers there's strong prejudice against the coloured at this level in the industry. These are only two of the quotes that I've pulled out from the one newspaper article. The articles also give a broader perspective on the colour bar and the impacts of its removal. To find the articles we used the Bristol Museum's website, which is currently under review, making it hard to access all the information. There are some issues with the archives that make us use newspapers instead of other sources. The first issue is that the archives are curiously incomplete for 1963. The bus company itself insists that all its records were automatically destroyed after 5 years. This, however, leaves only a few archives left, and many of these archives are newspaper articles, which carry relevance to the boycott and our question. So, overall, the newspaper articles are relevant and are practically all that remains of the archives, so should be used to answer our question.
In conclusion, we think an interesting research question would be, how did the removal of the colour bar by the Bristol Omnibus Company impact race relations within the workforce? Our question changed over time as we ran into limitations in terms of data collection, allowing for it to evolve into one which could be answered fully and successfully. We chose this question not only due to our enjoyment when studying the topic, but also due to its relevance to current global issues, such as the Black Lives Matter movement. Our research methods would include the gathering of both primary and secondary data. For example, we would conduct interviews with former employees from the bus company at the time and in the months and years after the removal of the colour bar. We would also read books on the matter, as well as looking at newspaper archives from the time, which give the opinions of workers and a broader perspective on the issue. Using the methods stated would hopefully result in reaching a balanced, unbiased conclusion.